The bright morning sun streamed through the windows of Sweet Heritage Bakery as Elena Rodriguez carefully arranged a fresh batch of conchas and pan dulce in the display case. The rich aroma of baked goods filled the small shop that had been her family's legacy for 3 generations. At 42, the slight creases around her eyes hinted at both laughter and struggle, the marks of a woman who had raised a son alone while keeping a business afloat in a rapidly changing neighborhood. The bell above the door chimed, and Elena looked up to see Mrs. Morales, one of her oldest customers. "Buenos dias, Elena. The usual, please, and maybe something extra sweet today. My grandson is visiting." Elena smiled warmly as she selected a perfect concha and added a small cookie shaped like a star. On the house for the little one. As Mrs. Morales chatted about her grandson's visit, Elena's gaze drifted to the window where a sleek black SUV had pulled up outside. A tall man in an expensive suit stepped out, his presence seeming oddly intrusive on the block of family-owned businesses. She'd been seeing more suits lately, taking pictures, making notes, harbingers of the change that threatened to sweep away everything familiar. The bell chimed again as Mrs. Morales left, and the man in the suit entered, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne that somehow diminished the warm bakery aromas. "Ms. Rodriguez?" His smile was practiced, confident. "Mason Thompson Horizon Development Group." Elena wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron. "Mr. Thompson, I've been expecting someone from your company." "Wonderful. Then you know why I'm here." He glanced around the bakery with polite interest that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Charming place. Family business?" "My grandmother opened it in 1962. Elena's voice carried quiet pride. "My son is the 4th generation to learn our recipes." Mason nodded, his attention already shifting to the folder he pulled from his leather briefcase. "I'll get right to it. Our development group has acquired nearly all the properties on this block for our new Horizon Plaza. Luxury apartments, high-end retail, office space. It's going to revitalize this entire area." "You mean replace it?" Elena said evenly. Mason's smile didn't falter. "Progress always brings change, Ms. Rodriguez, but it also brings opportunity." He slid a document across the counter. "This is our offer for your property. I think you'll find it's quite generous." Elena didn't touch the paper. "I received your company's letters. My answer hasn't changed." "Perhaps you should look at the number before deciding." His confident tone suggested he was used to people yielding to him. Elena finally glanced down at the offer. The figure was, indeed, substantial, enough to start over somewhere else, maybe even enough to help her son Miguel through college without the crushing loans she feared. For a moment, doubt crept in, whispering of an easier path. "I understand. This is a big decision," Mason continued, sensing her hesitation. "But you're the last holdout on the block. Everyone else has agreed to sell. This project is moving forward with or without Sweet Heritage Bakery." Elena looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "This bakery isn't just a building, Mr. Thompson. It's where my grandmother found her place in this country when she barely spoke English. It's where my father taught me that good bread takes patience. It's where I raised my son between batches of pan dulce after my husband left." She gestured to the walls covered with customer photos spanning decades. "This is community. Can your development offer that?" Something flickered across Mason's face. Annoyance, perhaps surprise at her resistance. He wasn't accustomed to people saying no. "Community changes, Ms. Rodriguez, evolves. Your bakery might hold sentimental value, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills." His tone hardened slightly. "Property taxes in this area will rise substantially once our development is complete. Can your small business survive that?" The implied threat wasn't subtle. Elena felt a flash of anger at how casually he wielded his power, how confident he was that she would eventually surrender. "I'll think about your offer," she said, not because she intended to accept, but because she needed him to leave before she said something she might regret. Mason's smile returned. "Victorious. Excellent. I knew you'd be reasonable." He handed her his business card, thick, embossed, expensive. "Call me when you're ready to discuss the details. I'm sure we can make this transition smooth for everyone." After he left, Eleanor locked herself in the small office at the back of the bakery and allowed herself a moment of doubt. Was she being foolish? The money could secure Miguel's future. They could open a bakery elsewhere. Why fight against the inevitable? Her phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. How did it go with the developer guy? Elena sighed, looking at the faded photograph on her desk, her grandmother on opening day in 1962, standing proudly in front of the newly painted bakery sign. Some things were worth fighting for, even against overwhelming odds. Have you ever stood your ground when everyone expected you to give in? 3 days later, Elena was organizing a community meeting at the local library. To her surprise, over 30 neighbors had shown up, both long-time residents and newer arrivals to the area. She recognized faces from the local hardware store, the flower shop, and the bookstore, all businesses that had already sold to Horizon Development. "I sold because I couldn't afford not to," admitted Hector from the hardware store, his expression a mixture of guilt and resignation. "My kids need college money more than they need to inherit a struggling business." "None of us blame you," Elena assured him. "We each have to make our own decisions. I just want us to have all the information before this development completely transforms our neighborhood." As she distributed flyers showing the proposed development plans, massive glass and steel structures, replacing the colorful older buildings, the library door opened. Mason Thompson walked in, and behind him was a young girl, perhaps 10 years old, with his same confident posture but softer features. The conversation in the room stuttered to a halt as Mason surveyed the gathering. His expression remained pleasant, but Elena could sense the calculation behind his eyes, assessing the potential threat of organized resistance. "Ms. Rodriguez," he nodded in greeting. "I heard about your little meeting and thought I should attend. Since you're discussing my project," he gestured to the girl. "This is my daughter, Lily. She has a school assignment about urban development, so I thought this would be educational." Elena noticed how he'd established control of the narrative. Not a community under threat, but an educational opportunity. The presence of his daughter was clearly meant to soften the atmosphere, making it difficult for anyone to express anger or opposition without seeming inappropriate in front of a child. "Everyone is welcome, Mr. Thompson," Elena replied evenly. "We're just discussing what these changes might mean for the people who live and work here." Mason smiled, guiding his daughter to a seat near the front. "Perfect, and I'm happy to address any concerns. Transparency is very important to Horizon Development." For the next 20 minutes, Mason smoothly dominated the conversation, presenting a vision of progress and economic opportunity. He showed sleek renderings of the proposed development on his tablet, happy people shopping in upscale stores, dining at trendy restaurants, enjoying rooftop gardens. "We're bringing jobs, increased property values, and modern amenities to an area that, frankly, needs revitalization," he explained. His voice was reasonable, authoritative. "Change can be uncomfortable, but it's inevitable." Elena watched as several of her neighbors nodded in agreement. Mason was good. He acknowledged concerns while subtly dismissing them, offered vague reassurances without making specific commitments. She noticed Lily watching her father with obvious admiration, absorbing his confident manner. When he finished, Mason looked directly at Elena with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps Ms. Rodriguez would like to share her perspective, since she's organized this gathering." He was putting her on the spot, expecting her to seem emotional and disorganized, in contrast to his polished presentation. Elena felt a momentary flutter of self-doubt. She wasn't a public speaker. She baked bread and raised her son and ran a small business. What could she say that would match his slick corporate pitch? But then she noticed Mrs. Morales in the back, nodding encouragingly. She saw Miguel, who had slipped in during Mason's presentation, giving her a thumbs up. And oddly, she noticed Lily Thompson, watching her with curious eyes. Elena stood and took a deep breath. She didn't have sleek renderings or corporate jargon, but she had something Mason Thompson didn't: genuine connection to this place and its people. "I'm not going to talk about property values or economic indicators," she began, her voice growing steadier with each word. "I want to talk about what makes a neighborhood more than just buildings and businesses. It's about knowing that Mr. Guzman at the bodega will extend credit when you're short on cash before payday. It's Mrs. Morales bringing soup when Miguel had the flu last winter. It's the hardware store where 3 generations have learned to fix things instead of replacing them." As she spoke, Elena moved among the people, making eye contact, touching shoulders gently. Progress isn't bad. Change isn't bad. But erasing history and community for profit isn't progress, it's erasure. She turned to face Mason directly. "Mr. Thompson sees an undervalued asset ready for development. I see the place where my son took his first steps, where neighbors become family, where traditions are preserved and shared." She gestured to the flyers showing the development plans. "There's nothing in these designs that looks like us, that feels like home. Where will the seniors who meet for coffee every morning go? Where will kids get their first jobs? Where will new immigrants find familiar foods and faces that help them belong?" Elena noticed something shift in the room, people sitting straighter, nodding more vigorously. But what surprised her most was Lily Thompson, who was watching her with wide, engaged eyes, completely absorbed in a way she hadn't been during her father's presentation. "I'm not against development," Elena continued. "I'm against displacement. I'm against treating our community like it's disposable. If Horizon Development truly wants to revitalize this neighborhood, why not design something that includes us instead of replaces us?" The room erupted in applause. Even some of the neighbors who had already sold their properties were nodding in agreement. Mason Thompson's expression remained composed, but Eleanor could see the tightness around his eyes, the slight clench of his jaw. He hadn't expected real opposition, but it was Lily's reaction that truly surprised Elena. The girl turned to her father and asked, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Dad, why can't you make room for the bakery in your new buildings? Ms. Rodriguez makes it sound important." The simple question from his daughter seemed to catch Mason off guard in a way Eleanor's entire speech hadn't. For a brief moment, his carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing something uncertain beneath. "It's complicated, sweetheart," he replied, his tone suddenly less assured. "But you always say we should listen to different perspectives," Lily persisted. "Her perspective makes sense to me." Several people chuckled, and Mason's face flushed slightly. Being questioned by his own daughter in public, especially when she was siding with his opposition, was clearly not part of his plan. Elena hadn't intended this kind of public humiliation, but she couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing his confidence shaken. Mason quickly regained his composure, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "You're right, Lily. We should listen. And these are all points we'll take into consideration." He addressed the room with a tight smile. "Thank you for your passionate perspective, Ms. Rodriguez. I think we all have a lot to think about." As the meeting dispersed, Elena noticed Mason ushering Lily quickly toward the exit, the girl still looking back with curious eyes. Elena had seen something in that brief exchange, A crack in Mason Thompson's armor, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. He wasn't just a corporate machine, he was a father who cared what his daughter thought of him. Miguel approached, grinning widely. "Mom, that was amazing! You totally owned that guy!" Elena watched Mason's retreating figure. "Maybe, but something tells me this isn't over. Men like Mason Thompson don't give up easily when they're challenged." She looked at her son's proud face and squeezed his hand. "And neither do women like me." What she didn't say aloud was the realization forming in her mind. Mason had unintentionally revealed his weakness by bringing his daughter, and in the battle ahead, Elena might need every advantage she could find. The next morning, Elena was elbow-deep in dough when her phone buzzed. The caller ID showed City Hall, specifically the Department of Health and Safety. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is Inspector Dawson. We've received a complaint about possible health code violations at your establishment. I'll need to conduct an immediate inspection." Eleanor's hands froze mid-need. "A complaint? We just passed inspection 2 months ago with perfect marks." "Nevertheless, ma'am, a complaint requires follow-up. I'll be there in 30 minutes. After hanging up, Elena looked around her immaculate kitchen with mounting anxiety. She'd always been meticulous about cleanliness. Her grandmother had instilled that value in her from childhood. A health violation could damage her reputation irreparably, especially in these uncertain times. When Inspector Dawson arrived, a thin man with a perpetually furrowed brow, Eleanor noticed him taking photos before even entering the bakery. His inspection was unusually thorough, bordering on intrusive, checking areas that had never warranted attention during previous visits. "Your ventilation system needs updating," he announced, making notes on his clipboard, "and several of your electrical outlets don't meet current code requirements." "Those outlets were approved in our last inspection," Elena protested. Dawson barely looked up. "Regulations change, Ms. Rodriguez. I'm also concerned about the structural integrity of your storage room ceiling." He gestured toward a barely perceptible water stain. "That could indicate serious issues." As the inspector continued finding minor infractions that had never been issues before, Elena felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. This wasn't random. The timing was too convenient. After Dawson left, promising to send a detailed report of the violations that would need immediate attention, Elena called Miguel at college. "It's Thompson," she said without preamble. "He's using his connections at City Hall to pressure me." "Can he do that?" Miguel sounded both angry and worried. "People with money and influence can do a lot of things," Elena replied, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "But don't worry, I've dealt with worse." What she didn't tell Miguel was how expensive the required updates would be, potentially tens of thousands of dollars she didn't have, or how the inspector had hinted that more serious citations could follow if the initial issues weren't addressed promptly. Later that afternoon, Eleanor was surprised to see Lily Thompson approach the bakery. The girl paused outside, seemingly debating whether to enter, then pushed the door open with determination. The bell chimed cheerfully, a counterpoint to Elena's wary expression. "Hello, Ms. Rodriguez," Lily said formally. I wanted to try some of your bread. Dad says you make the best conchas in the city." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, doubting Mason Thompson had said any such thing. "Did your father send you here?" Lily shook her head, her composure slipping slightly. "No. He doesn't know I'm here. My nanny dropped me at the library, but I walked over instead." She glanced around the bakery with genuine curiosity. "I've been thinking about what you said at the meeting, about community and history and stuff." Despite her suspicions, Elena found herself warming to the girl's earnest demeanor. She selected a fresh concha and placed it on a colorful plate. "On the house, first-time customers get a free sample." Lily's face lit up as she took a bite. "This is amazing," she exclaimed, crumbs falling onto her school uniform. "We never have bread like this at home. Our housekeeper buys everything from the organic market." "This recipe came from my grandmother," Elena explained, unable to resist sharing. "She taught me that good bread needs time and patience, things that are getting harder to find in this fast-paced world. My dad says, time. It's money," Lily offered. Elena smiled gently. "Some things are worth more than money." As they talked, Eleanor was struck by how mature Lily seemed for her age. Observant, thoughtful, asking questions about the bakery's history and the neighborhood. There was no guile in her interest, just genuine curiosity. Eleanor found herself sharing stories about the bakery's past, pointing out the wall of customer photos spanning decades. "That's so cool," Lily said, examining a faded photograph of Elena as a young girl, standing beside her grandmother. "You have, actual roots here." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "We move a lot. Dad's always starting new projects, in different cities." Something in her tone made Elena pause. "That must be hard, always being the new kid." Lily shrugged with practiced nonchalance. "I'm used to it. Dad says it builds character." She traced the edge of her plate with one finger. "But sometimes I wish we could just stay somewhere long enough for it to feel like home." The vulnerability in that statement touched Elena unexpectedly. Before she could respond, the bakery door burst open, and Mason Thompson stood there, his normally composed expression replaced with barely contained fury. "Lily, what are you doing here?" He strode forward, placing a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Your nanny is frantic." "I just wanted to try the bread," Lily explained, shrinking under her father's glare. Mason's gaze shifted to Elena, hardening with accusation. "Did you encourage her to come here?" "Of course not," Elena replied evenly. "She came in on her own. We were just talking." "About what exactly?" His tone implied something sinister. In the conversation between a bakery owner and a curious child. Before Eleanor could answer, Lily spoke up. "About the bakery's history, Dad. Ms. Rodriguez's family has owned it for forever, and she gave me this bread. It's really good." She held up the half-eaten concha as evidence. Mason's jaw tightened. "Get your things, Lily. We're leaving." He turned to Elena, voice low and controlled. "I don't appreciate you using my daughter to get to me." Elena felt a flash of indignation. "I did no such thing. She came in as a customer, and I treated her like any other." "Stay away from my daughter," Mason warned quietly. "And I suggest you review the inspection report you received today. Those violations could result in significant penalties, even closure, if not addressed promptly." The threat was unmistakable. As Mason ushered a reluctant Lily toward the door, the girl glanced back with an apologetic expression that made Elena's heart ache. Have you ever been wrongly accused of something, only to find yourself powerless against the accusation? Over the next 2 weeks, Elena's situation worsened. The health department report demanded expensive updates within an impossibly short time frame. Her regular customers began asking concerned questions about rumors of unsanitary conditions, rumors that seemed to be spreading through neighborhood social media groups from anonymous accounts. Meanwhile, several of her wholesale restaurant clients abruptly canceled their standing orders, citing quality concerns that hadn't existed. The week before, when Elena pressed one restaurant owner who had been buying her bread for years, he reluctantly admitted that his landlord, a property corporation with ties to Horizon Development, had suggested finding another supplier. The systematic pressure was having its intended effect. Elena's revenue dropped sharply just as she faced unexpected expenses. The financial cushion she had carefully built over years was rapidly dwindling. "It's not just financial harassment," Miguel insisted during their weekly video call. His face, On the screen looked tense with worry. It's defamation. You could sue. Elena sighed, feeling the weight of exhaustion. With what money, mijo? Lawyers cost more than I can afford right now. Then sell, Mom, Miguel urged, his expression pained. I hate saying it, but maybe it's time. We can start over somewhere else. And let him win through intimidation. Elena shook her head firmly. That's not the example I want to set for you. What Elena didn't tell her son was how close she was to breaking. Each morning, it became harder to wake before dawn to mix dough that fewer customers would buy. Each night, she lay awake calculating figures that never balanced, searching for solutions that never materialized. One evening, as Elena was closing up, a soft knock came at the bakery's front door. Through the glass, she saw Lily Thompson standing, alone on the sidewalk, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Against her better judgment, Elena unlocked the door. "Lily, what are you doing here so late?" "I need to talk to you," the girl said, slipping inside. "It's important." "Does your father know you're here?" Elena asked, already guessing the answer. Lily shook her head. "I told my nanny I was going to bed early. I snuck out." She pulled a folded paper from her jacket pocket. "I found this on Dad's desk. I thought you should see it." Elena unfolded the document, a memorandum from the City Planning Department regarding expedited approval for Horizon Development's project, contingent on the acquisition of all properties in the designated zone. Attached was a private email exchange between Mason and someone named Davis at City Hall, discussing how to accelerate the holdout situation through regulatory pressure. "He's using his connections to target you," Lily said, her expression troubled. "It's not right." Elena stared at the girl in astonishment. "Lily, why are you showing me this? He's your father." Lily's eyes dropped to the floor. Because I keep thinking about what you said, about community. And after I visited, I looked up the history of this neighborhood online." She met Elena's gaze with surprising intensity. "Dad always talks about his developments like they're just business deals, but they're people's lives." A car horn honked outside, making Lily jump. "That's my friend's mom. She thinks I'm visiting for a school project." She moved toward the door, then hesitated. "There's something else." Dad's company had problems with one of their buildings across town, the Carson Street apartments. There was some kind of structural issue they covered up during inspections. I overheard him talking about it on the phone. Before Elena could respond, Lily slipped out, leaving Elena holding evidence of Mason Thompson's deliberate campaign against her bakery. Evidence provided by his own daughter. The next morning, Elena called in a favor from an old high school friend who now worked as a journalist at the local newspaper. Over coffee at a cafe far from the bakery, she shared the documents Lily had provided. "This is serious, Elena," her friend said, eyes widening as she read. "Corruption at the planning department, targeted harassment. Thompson could face real consequences if this gets out." "I don't want to use a child against her father," Elena admitted, "but I'm running out of options." "Let me look into the Carson Street property first," her friend suggested. "If there's a pattern of cutting corners on safety regulations, that's a story in itself, one that doesn't have to involve Lily directly." As Elena walked back to her bakery, she felt conflicted. Using the information Lily had provided felt wrong, yet allowing Mason's unethical tactics to succeed seemed equally problematic. She had always taught Miguel that integrity mattered, that how you fought was as important as what you fought for. Now her principles were being tested in ways she had never anticipated. When she rounded the corner to her street, Elena stopped short. A crowd had gathered outside Sweet Heritage Bakery. As she pushed through concerned onlookers, she saw city officials placing a bright orange "condemned" notice on her door. "What's happening?" she demanded, confronting the official with the clipboard, the same Inspector Dawson who had conducted the suspicious inspection. Structural concerns, Ms. Rodriguez, he replied without meeting her eyes. An anonymous tip suggested the building might be unsafe. Our engineer found significant issues with the foundation that pose immediate danger. That's impossible, Elena protested. This building has stood for 60 years without structural problems. I'm just doing my job, ma'am. He handed her a document. You have 48 hours to vacate. After that, entry will be prohibited until all violations are addressed. As the officials departed, leaving Elena staring at the notice in disbelief, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Perhaps now you're ready to be reasonable about my offer. The paperwork is already prepared. Mason Thompson. Elena felt a cold rage building inside her. She had played by the rules, tried to fight fairly. Mason Thompson had not. It was time to reconsider her approach. That night, as rain pounded against the windows of her small apartment above the now-closed bakery, Elena made a decision. She called her journalist friend. "I want you to investigate everything," she said firmly. "The Carson Street property, the corrupt city officials, all of it. Hold nothing back. Whatever happened next, Elena knew there would be no turning back. The stakes had just become much higher for everyone involved. The headline of the Metro section read, "Safety Concerns Plague Horizon Development Projects." Elena's journalist friend had worked quickly, uncovering a pattern of questionable practices at several of Mason Thompson's properties. The article detailed how the Carson Street apartments had developed serious structural issues barely 2 years after construction due to substandard materials and cut corners, problems that Horizon Development had allegedly concealed through falsified inspection reports. Elena had expected to feel vindicated. Instead, she felt hollow as she packed her baking equipment into storage boxes. The newspaper expose had triggered a city investigation into Horizon Development's practices, but it hadn't reversed the condemnation of her bakery. Sweet Heritage remained closed, its future uncertain. Her phone rang. Miguel, calling between classes. "Mom, I saw the article. This is great, right? They can't get away with this now." Elena couldn't bring herself to share his optimism. "It's not that simple, mijo. The truth doesn't always win immediately." She didn't tell him that she'd already started looking for jobs at commercial bakeries. Someone had to pay the bills, and pride wouldn't keep the lights on. After hanging up, Elena found herself staring at the wall of customer photos she'd carefully removed from the bakery. Generations of celebrations, preserved in fading images, quinceañeras, weddings, baptisms, graduations, all marked with Sweet Heritage pastries at the center. Was this really the end of her family's legacy? A knock at her apartment door startled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Lily Thompson standing there, eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Lily, what are you—" "I'm so sorry," the girl blurted out, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Dad's furious about the newspaper article. He knows it was me who took the documents. He's never been so angry." Elena quickly ushered her inside, concerned by the girl's distress. "Does he know you're here?" Lily shook her head. "No. He grounded me indefinitely and took my phone. I'm supposed to be in my room, but I snuck out again. I had to warn you." "Warn me about what?" Lily wiped at her tears with her sleeve. "He had a meeting with his lawyers this morning. They're going to sue you for defamation. They're saying you fabricated evidence to damage his reputation because you're bitter about the development." Elena sank into a chair, the weight of this new threat settling heavily on her shoulders. A lawsuit would drain what little resources she had left, regardless of its merit. "He's also talking to the bank that holds your mortgage," Lily continued. "Something about accelerating the terms because the property value has changed." The calculated viciousness of Mason's counterattack shouldn't have surprised Elena, yet it did. "He's trying to destroy me completely," she murmured, more to herself than to Lily. I tried to tell him he was wrong, Lily said, fresh tears welling in her eyes. I told him what he was doing was hurting real people. He said I was being naive, that business is business, and that I'd understand when I was older. Her voice hardened with a determination that seemed beyond her years. But I don't want to understand that. Ever. Elena studied the girl, struck by her courage in standing up to her father. Lily, I appreciate you trying to help, but this is a complicated adult situation. I don't want you caught in the middle. I'm already in the middle, Lily insisted. Dad brought me to that meeting because he thought it would help him look good. He made me part of this. She hesitated, then added quietly, and now I can't unsee what he's doing. A sudden pounding on the door made them both jump. Elena Rodriguez. Open this door immediately. Mason's voice, tight with barely controlled rage, echoed through the apartment. Lily's face drained of color. He tracked my phone, she whispered, pulling an older model from her pocket. I didn't think he could. It's my backup one. Elena gestured for Lily to stay quiet as she approached the door, opening it just enough. To face Mason, she positioned herself to block his view of the apartment interior. Mr. Thompson, this is unexpected. Mason's normally immaculate appearance had slipped. His tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled, eyes burning with a cold fury. Oh, where is my daughter? I know she's here. I haven't seen Lily since the day she visited the bakery. Elena lied smoothly, hoping the girl would have the sense to stay hidden. Don't play games with me, Mason hissed, lowering his voice. Her phone GPS tracks to this location. Step aside. This is my private residence. You have no right to enter. Dad? Lily appeared beside Elena, ignoring the warning glance Elena shot her. I'm here. Don't blame Ms. Rodriguez. She didn't know I was coming. Mason reached forward, grabbing his daughter's arm more roughly. If the necessary. Get in the car, now! As Lily reluctantly moved toward the stairs, Mason turned back to Elena, his voice low and dangerous. First you turned my daughter against me, then you planted false stories in the press. You've made this very personal, Ms. Rodriguez. You made it personal when you used your connections to shut down my family's business, Elena countered, refusing. To be intimidated despite the pounding of her heart. A cold smile spread across Mason's face. You have no idea what you're up against. By the time I'm finished, you'll wish you'd taken my original offer. He leaned closer. Everyone has vulnerabilities, Ms. Rodriguez. Even your college boy. Would be a shame if his scholarship committee received anonymous concerns about academic integrity, wouldn't it? The implied threat against Miguel sent a chill through Elena, unlike anything she'd felt before. Mason Thompson was revealing himself to be not just a ruthless businessman, but someone willing to harm an innocent young man to get what he wanted. Stay away from my son, Elena warned, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Then stay away. From my daughter and my business, Mason replied. The lawsuit will be filed tomorrow. I suggest you find a good attorney, though I doubt you can afford one who can match my legal team. As he turned to leave, Lily still waiting miserably by the car, he added with cruel satisfaction, the bank will be calling about your mortgage. Tomorrow as well. Enjoy your weekend. It might be the last peaceful one you have for a very long time. After they left, Elena stood in her doorway for several minutes, trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. Mason Thompson had just escalated their conflict beyond property and business. He had threatened her son, the one line she could not allow anyone to cross. If this was war, then perhaps it was time she stopped fighting with one hand tied behind her back. The next morning, a torrential rainstorm hit the city with unexpected intensity. Elena was meeting with a community legal aid attorney, her only option for legal representation, when emergency alerts began blaring from everyone's phones. Flash flood warnings. the attorney explained, checking her screen. Apparently, the storm drains in several areas are backing up. They're evacuating low-lying neighborhoods. Elena's attention was caught by the television in the corner of the waiting room, where a local news crew was broadcasting live from a familiar location, the Carson Street apartments that had been mentioned in the newspaper expose. "We're seeing significant structural damage developing in real time," the reporter shouted over the howling wind. "According to emergency services, the building's foundation appears to be shifting due to water infiltration. All residents are being evacuated immediately." The camera panned to show alarmed residents rushing from the building, some carrying children or pets, others clutching hastily packed bags. In the background, city officials and engineers gestured urgently at a large crack developing along the building's concrete base. "That's one of Thompson's properties," Elena murmured, a sick feeling growing in her stomach as she watched the crisis unfold. Her phone buzzed with a text from her journalist friend. "Are you seeing this? It's worse than we thought. Carson Street. Evacuation happening now. Call me ASAP." The legal consultation forgotten, Elena stepped outside under the shelter of the building's awning and returned the call. "Elena, this is huge," her friend said without preamble. "The structural issues we reported, they're catastrophic. The building is literally falling apart in the rain. My sources say it would have passed inspection last year if Thompson hadn't bribed officials to overlook major foundation problems." "Are people hurt?" Elena asked, watching rain pound the pavement. "No casualties reported yet, thank God. But dozens of families are displaced, possibly permanently." There was a pause. "Elena, I have to ask, did you know how bad it was when you gave me the tip?" "Of course not," Elena replied, horrified at the implication. "I knew there were safety concerns, but nothing like this." "Well, Thompson's going to have bigger problems than your bakery now. Criminal negligence charges are already being discussed." As Elena hung up, her mind raced. This development should have felt like vindication, proof that Mason Thompson's business practices were as unethical as she'd believed. Instead, all she could think about were the families standing in the rain, watching their homes become uninhabitable. Had her pursuit of justice against Mason inadvertently accelerated this disaster? If she hadn't pushed for the newspaper investigation, would those structural issues have been addressed before they reached this critical point? A text message interrupted her troubled thoughts, from an unknown number, but Elena immediately recognized who it was from. Dad's at Carson Street. "He's freaking out. News crews everywhere. He doesn't know I'm texting you. Lily." Another message followed quickly. "He's saying it's your fault, that the article made it impossible to fix the issues quietly. He's looking for someone to blame." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Mason Thompson was cornered, facing potential criminal charges and financial ruin. A desperate man with power and resources was a dangerous combination. Later that afternoon, as Elena watched continuing coverage of the Carson Street disaster from her apartment, a breaking news alert cut into the broadcast. "We're receiving reports of a fire at a commercial storage facility in the East District. Multiple units are affected and firefighters are on the scene." The camera switched to helicopter footage of a large storage complex with thick smoke billowing from one section. Elena froze, recognizing the facility where she had stored all the bakery equipment and family heirlooms she had salvaged from Sweet Heritage. A sick certainty settled in her stomach. This was no coincidence. Mason Thompson was making good on his threat, attacking her most vulnerable points. First Miguel's academic standing, now her family's legacy. Elena grabbed her keys and raced toward her car, heedless of the pouring rain. By the time she reached the storage facility, firefighters had contained the blaze, but the damage was extensive. Her unit, and only her unit, had been completely destroyed. "Looks like an electrical fire," the facility manager explained, apologetically. These older buildings sometimes have wiring issues. Elena knew better. This was retaliation, pure and simple, and terrifyingly effective. In one calculated move, Mason had destroyed irreplaceable items and family heirlooms that had survived generations. The old recipe books, the handcrafted tools her grandfather had made, the original bakery sign, all gone. As she stood staring at the charred remains, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Ms. Rodriguez?" Mason's voice was calm, almost pleasant. "Terrible day for disasters, isn't it? First Carson Street, now a fire. One never knows what might happen next." "You did this," Elena said quietly, rain mingling with tears on her face. "Did what?" "I'm dealing with a major crisis at my property, as you well know." His tone hardened. "A crisis your meddling made significantly worse. Those families could have been killed, Mason, all because you cut corners on safety. Spare me. The sanctimony. Business involves risk management. Sometimes calculations don't work out as planned." "This isn't about calculations," Elena replied, her voice rising. "It's about people's lives." "Speaking of lives," Mason continued as if she hadn't spoken, "how is Miguel doing at college? Still maintaining that impressive GPA? Scholarships are so competitive these days." The threat against her son rekindled Elena's anger. "Stay away from my son, or I swear—" "You'll what?" Mason laughed coldly. "You have nothing left, Elena. Your bakery is condemned. Your equipment is destroyed. Your reputation will be next. I've already spoken to several local business associations about your vendetta against successful development." Elena closed her eyes, fighting against despair. He was right. In material terms, she had almost nothing left to lose. "However," Mason continued, his tone shifting to something almost conciliatory, "I'm not unreasonable. My offer for your property still stands, minus 20% to account for the recent unpleasantness. Sign the papers, move away from this neighborhood, and I'll ensure Miguel's academic future remains bright. Refuse and—" He left the threat unfinished. "Why?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Why destroy so much over one small property?" There was a pause before Mason answered. "Because people like you need to understand that progress cannot be stopped. Because no one says no to me, and because now it's personal." After he hung up, Elena sat in her car for a long time, watching rain stream down the windshield, obscuring the world outside. She had always taught Miguel that integrity mattered, that standing up for what was right would eventually be rewarded. But now, facing the systematic destruction of everything she valued, those principles seemed naively idealistic. Was protecting her son's future worth surrendering to a man like Mason Thompson? What good was winning a moral victory if it cost Miguel his education and opportunities? As these questions tormented her, Elena's phone buzzed with another text from Lily. "Something big is happening. Dad just got off the phone with the mayor. Emergency meeting tonight. All hands on deck. I'm scared." Before Elena could process this cryptic message, another text arrived from a different number, her journalist friend. "Call me now. Source. Says Thompson meeting with city officials tonight to push through emergency demolition order for entire block, including your building, using Carson Street disaster as leverage. They're going to claim imminent public safety risk." Elena stared at her phone in disbelief. Mason was using the very disaster created by his own negligence as justification to expedite the demolition of her family's bakery, along with the few remaining original buildings on the block. This was the end game, the final move that would erase not just her resistance, but the physical legacy of generations. If the bulldozers came, there would be nothing left to fight for. As rain continued to pound her car, Elena made a decision. She had tried fighting ethically against an opponent, who recognized no moral boundaries. She had tried using the truth against someone who wielded lies as weapons. None of it had worked. Perhaps it was time for a different approach, one that used Mason Thompson's greatest weakness against him. Elena opened her contacts and dialed a number she had been avoiding. "Ricardo, it's Elena Rodriguez. I know we haven't spoken in years, but I need your help. It's about your daughter's legacy." Ricardo Suarez, her former father-in-law and Miguel's grandfather, had been a city council member for decades before retiring. He had connections throughout local government that Elena had always refused to leverage, believing her bakery should succeed on its own merits. But now, with everything at stake, Elena was prepared to call in every favor, use every connection, and cross lines she had previously respected. If Mason Thompson wanted war, she would give him one he didn't expect. As she drove through the storm toward Ricardo's house, Elena received one final text from Lily. "Dad just left for City Hall. Emergency meeting in the mayor's office at 8 p.m. Whatever you're going to do it fast." Elena pressed harder on the gas pedal, determination hardening within her. The decisive battle for Sweet Heritage Bakery and for the soul of her neighborhood was about to begin. What would you do if someone threatened everything you loved and playing by the rules wasn't enough to stop them? The rain had finally stopped by the time Elena arrived at City Hall, accompanied by Ricardo Suarez. Despite his 70 years and recent hip surgery, her former father-in-law moved with purpose, nodding to security guards who still recognized him from his council. Days. "The meeting's already started," Ricardo said, checking his watch. "Marcos at the clerk's office confirmed it's happening in the executive conference room." Elena hesitated at the bottom of the marble staircase. What if this doesn't work? What if we're too late? Ricardo placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "Elena, in 30 years of city politics, I learned one thing. Nothing is final until the papers are signed. And sometimes," he added with a grim smile, "not even then." As they approached the conference room, Elena could hear raised voices through the heavy wooden doors. One in particular stood out, Mason Thompson's, unusually agitated. "The situation is clear-cut," he was saying. "The Carson Street incident proves these older structures are fundamentally unsafe. We need emergency action before another disaster occurs." "That's quite a leap, Mr. Thompson," responded a female voice Elena didn't recognize. "Carson Street's issues stemmed from your company's construction practices, not from any inherent problems with older buildings." "Commissioner Chen, with all due respect," Mason began. "With all due respect," the woman interrupted firmly. "Your company is under investigation for falsifying safety reports. That hardly positions you as an authority on public safety concerns." Ricardo smiled at Elena. "Sandra Chen, head of the Historical Preservation Commission, always had a backbone of steel." Before they could hear more, the door swung open, and a young aide stepped out, nearly colliding with them. His eyes widened in recognition. "Councilman Suarez! I didn't know you were part of this meeting." Ricardo clasped the young man's shoulder warmly. "Just observing, Devin. Ms. Rodriguez and I have a vested interest in the outcome." The aide hesitated, glancing back at the closed door. "It's pretty tense in there. Thompson brought lawyers and engineers, pushing hard for emergency demolition orders. Then perhaps we should join before any hasty decisions are made," Ricardo suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't really a request. Inside the conference room, conversation halted as all eyes turned toward the new arrivals. Elena immediately spotted Mason Thompson at the head of the table, flanked by men in expensive suits, presumably his attorneys and engineers. The mayor sat opposite him, looking uncomfortable, while various commissioners and officials filled the remaining seats. Mason's expression darkened when he saw Eleanor. "This is a closed meeting. What is she doing here?" Mayor Williams cleared his throat. "Ricardo, this is somewhat irregular." "Irregular?" Ricardo raised an eyebrow. Like rushing through demolition orders based on evidence from a developer whose properties are currently collapsing due to negligence? That kind of irregular? A murmur rippled through the room. Elena noticed several officials shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Ms. Rodriguez has a legitimate interest in these proceedings, Ricardo continued smoothly. Her family business is one of the properties under discussion. Her condemned property, Mason corrected sharply, which our engineers believe shares similar structural vulnerabilities with the Carson Street building. Interesting timing on that condemnation, Elena said, speaking for the first time. Coming immediately after I refused to sell, Mason's attorney intervened. Mayor Williams, this is becoming counterproductive. We've presented clear evidence of public safety concerns that require immediate action. What you've presented, Commissioner, Chen countered, are speculative assessments from engineers employed by Horizon Development, a company currently facing multiple investigations. The tension in the room was palpable. Elena could see the mayor wavering, caught between competing pressures. Mason Thompson had significant influence through his development projects and political contributions, but the Carson Street disaster had changed the dynamic. No official wanted to be associated with another potential catastrophe. Perhaps, Ricardo suggested with practiced diplomatic skill, we should table this discussion until independent structural assessments can be completed for all buildings in question. Mason's face flushed with barely contained anger. That could take weeks. The development timeline is less important than public safety, Ricardo finished smoothly. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Thompson? As the debate continued, Elena noticed something unexpected, a subtle shift in the room's energy. Officials who had initially seemed ready to approve Mason's request were now asking pointed questions about his company's inspection practices. The mayor, initially deferential, was creating more distance between himself and Horizon Development's proposals. What none of them realized, what Elena herself had only discovered hours earlier through Ricardo's connections, was that the Carson Street disaster had triggered a cascade of revelations about questionable practices across multiple Horizon Development projects. City inspectors were already quietly reviewing every building permit Mason's company had been granted in the past 5 years. The ground was shifting beneath Mason Thompson's feet, though he didn't yet realize how dramatically. As Mason launched into another impassioned justification for immediate demolition, the conference room door opened again. Elena turned, expecting another city official, and found herself staring at Lily Thompson, accompanied by an older woman who must have been her nanny. The room fell silent. Mason's face drained of color. "Lily, what are you doing here?" The girl stepped forward, her earlier fear replaced by a calm determination that belied her age. "I have something everyone needs to see." She placed a USB drive on the conference table. "These are the original structural reports for the Carson Street apartments, the ones that were never submitted to the city." Mason rose halfway from his chair. "Lily, that's enough. You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing, Dad." The girl's voice trembled slightly, but didn't break. "You taught me that integrity matters in business, that we have to stand behind our work." The mayor glanced between father and daughter, then at the USB drive. "Where did you get these documents, young lady?" "From Dad's home office," Lily answered. "He keeps backups of everything. There are also emails about the Sweet Heritage Bakery, how he arranged for the health inspections and the condemnation. He has friends at City Hall who helped him target Ms. Rodriguez because she wouldn't sell." One of the city officials, a man Elena recognized from the planning department, abruptly stood and excused himself, his face ashen. Mason's composure shattered completely. "Lily, stop this immediately. You're betraying your own family." "No, Dad." Lily replied, tears welling in her eyes despite her steady voice. You betrayed everything you said our family stands for. You told me business was about building things that last, that make communities better. She gestured toward Elena. Her bakery makes people happy. It brings them together. Your buildings are literally falling apart because you cut corners for profit. The silence that followed was deafening. Mason stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. A mixture of shock, anger, and something else Elena couldn't quite identify. Pride, perhaps, or recognition. The mayor cleared his throat. I believe we've heard enough for tonight. This meeting is adjourned pending a full review of these new materials and independent assessments of all properties in question. As the room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs and officials began gathering their things, Mason remained frozen, eyes locked with his daughter's. The vulnerability Eleanor had glimpsed at their first confrontation was fully exposed now. A man whose carefully constructed world was collapsing on multiple fronts. Lily's nanny gently guided the girl toward the door. As they passed Elena, Lily paused. I'm sorry about your bakery. I hope it can be fixed. Thank you for your courage, Elena replied softly. It takes strength to stand up for what's right, especially when it's difficult. Lily nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears before she continued out of the room. Mason remained at the conference table as everyone else departed, staring blankly at the documents spread before him. As Elena turned to leave with Ricardo, she heard Mason call her name, Ms. Rodriguez. Elena, wait. She paused at the doorway, turning back with caution. Mason looked utterly defeated, his confident facade completely stripped away. I've lost her, he said quietly. My own daughter. Despite everything, Elena felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. No, you haven't. Not yet. She'll never trust me again. Mason gestured helplessly at the USB drive the mayor had taken. How could she? After seeing all of that, Elena chose her next words carefully. Children are remarkably forgiving when they see genuine change. The question is whether you're capable of that. Mason was silent for a long moment, his expression shifting through a range of emotions: anger, shame, regret. Finally, he asked, what would that even look like now? It was a surprisingly vulnerable question from a man who, hours earlier, had been threatening to destroy her son's future. Elena recognized it for what it was. Not surrender exactly, but the first crack in a worldview that had justified any action in pursuit of success. It would start with repairing what you've broken, she answered simply. Both the buildings and the trust. 3 months later, Elena stood in the renovated kitchen of Sweet Heritage Bakery, breathing in the familiar scent of fresh bread. Sunlight streamed through new windows, illuminating the gleaming equipment and freshly painted walls. The structural repairs, certified by independent engineers, had been completed weeks ahead of schedule, funded entirely by Horizon Development as part of a comprehensive settlement agreement. The bell above the door chimed as Miguel entered, home from college for the weekend. Mum, there's a TV crew outside, and the mayor is giving some kind of speech, Elena smiled, wiping flour from her hands. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the neighborhood revitalization project. I told you about it, remember? Together, they stepped outside to join the small crowd gathered on the sidewalk. Mayor Williams was standing beside a podium, scissors in hand, ready to cut a ceremonial ribbon stretched across the newly renovated street. This project represents a new vision for urban development, the mayor was saying. One that honors our city's heritage while embracing thoughtful progress. The Heritage District will serve as a model for how historic businesses and modern amenities can coexist and thrive together. Elena surveyed the transformed block with satisfaction. Instead of demolishing the existing buildings, Horizon Development had restored them, preserving their historic facades while modernizing interiors. New green spaces and pedestrian areas connected the older structures with carefully designed modern buildings that complemented rather than overwhelmed the neighborhood's character. As the mayor finished his speech and prepared to cut the ribbon, Elena noticed Mason and Lily Thompson standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. Mason caught her eye and nodded, a simple acknowledgement that spoke volumes about the journey they had both taken. The legal settlement had been comprehensive. In exchange for Eleanor dropping all claims and agreeing not to pursue criminal charges. For the storage facility fire, which investigators had indeed ruled suspicious, Mason had committed to complete restoration of Sweet Heritage Bakery, structural repairs to all affected buildings, and a complete redesign of the development project to preserve the neighborhood's character while still allowing for growth. More significantly, he had publicly acknowledged the safety failures at Carson Street and established a fund to assist displaced residents. The criminal investigations had resulted in fines rather than charges, a consequence of Mason's newfound cooperation and transparency with authorities. The ribbon fell away to enthusiastic applause. As the crowd began to disperse, Lily approached. Elena with cautious steps. "Miss Rodriguez, we brought you something." She held out a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "It's from both of us." Elena unwrapped it carefully to find an antique wooden rolling pin, intricately carved with patterns of wheat and flowers, remarkably similar to one her grandmother had used, lost in the storage facility fire. "We found it at an antique shop in Vermont," Lily explained. "Dad remembered you talking about your grandmother's rolling pin at the first community meeting." Elena looked up in surprise. Mason had stepped closer, his expression uncharacteristically humble. "It's not the same as having the original," he said quietly. "But I wanted you to know that I understand now. Some things have value beyond their price tag." The gesture was unexpected. Not just the gift itself, but the thought behind it. This wasn't part of the legal settlement or public relations campaign. It was something more personal. "Thank you," Elena said simply, running her fingers over the carved wood. "This means a lot. Your bakery looks amazing," Lily enthused, glancing toward the freshly painted storefront. "Dad says you're doing a special event for the reopening." Elena nodded. "Community bread-making classes, teaching traditional recipes from different cultures in the neighborhood." "Could I sign up?" Lily asked eagerly, then added with a shy glance at her father, "Both of us, maybe?" Mason looked as surprised as Elena felt. "I don't think I'd be very good at baking, Lily." "Everyone can learn," Elena found herself saying. "The first class is tomorrow afternoon. Family pairs get a discount." The invitation surprised her as much as them. After everything that had happened, she hadn't expected to find any common ground with Mason Thompson. Yet here they were, not friends certainly, but no longer enemies. Later that evening, as Elena and Miguel shared a quiet dinner in their apartment above the bakery, her son asked the question that had been on his mind. "Mom, I still don't understand. After everything he did, threatening me, destroying our things, nearly taking everything from us, how can you even speak to him?" Eleanor considered this carefully. "I'm not sure I've forgiven him completely," she admitted. "But I've seen something I didn't expect, genuine change. Not just in his business practices, but in how he sees the world and his place in it. Because his daughter stood up to him," Miguel noted. "Yes, and that's a powerful lesson in itself." Eleanor reached for her son's hand. "Sometimes the strongest influence comes from the people we least expect." Lily Thompson had the courage to challenge her father's values, and it changed everything, not just for us, but for this entire neighborhood. Through the window, they could see the transformed street below. The preserved historic buildings now housing thriving businesses, the new green spaces where neighbors gathered, the careful balance of old and new that honored the past while Embracing the future, the bakery is your legacy, Miguel said, following her gaze. But this changing how development happens here, making someone like Mason Thompson rethink his whole approach, that's a different kind of legacy. Eleanor smiled, thinking of the community bread-making class scheduled for tomorrow. Of Lily's eagerness to learn, of Mason's hesitant steps toward a different understanding of value. Sometimes winning doesn't look like what we expect, she said softly. Sometimes it's not about defeating an enemy, but transforming them into something else entirely. The next afternoon, as Eleanor prepared the bakery for the first community class, she placed her grandmother's photograph back in its place of honor on the wall. Beside it, she hung a new addition, a simple frame containing the condemnation notice that had once threatened everything, now transformed into a symbol of resilience and unexpected transformation. The bell above the door chimed, and she turned to greet her first students, Lily Thompson, practically bouncing with excitement, and behind her Mason, looking decidedly out of place in rolled-up sleeves but making the effort nonetheless. "Welcome to Sweet Heritage," Elena said, handing them both aprons. "Today, we're going to learn that the most important ingredient in good bread isn't flour or water or yeast. It's patience and respect for the process." As Mason awkwardly tied his apron, his eyes met Elena's, and a moment of understanding passed. Between them, acknowledgement that some transformations, like good bread, require time and unexpected ingredients. That communities, like recipes, can evolve while honoring their essential character. And that sometimes the most powerful victory isn't destroying your opponent, but helping them become something better than they were before. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more powerful tales like this. See you in the next video.